Welcome.
Shalom.
The title of this was Matthew 28:1, End of the Sabbath. But the Sabbath never ended. So I figured I would change the title on that. And let's look at it now. The closing minutes of Yahuwah's Shabbat. What happened in the closing minutes of the Shabbat, according to Matthew 28:1? So we're going to be looking at this, and we're going to go through a lot of information, and we're going to come back to it in the Torah. Let's get started here. And here's a notice for your information. Please note, the first morning twilight mixture is before the sunrise. This study will not be marking the sunrise, as it is not important for this study. But you see here is the format of the 24-hour cycle from creation. It starts at dawn, there goes the sunrise, and the Shabbat light season, then comes the sunset, and it's the Shabbat night season, and then dawn ends the 24-hour cycle. Now, for those who are not used to the word cycle, I choose to use the word cycle because there has been too much confusion with the word day, too much confusion on whether it's 12 hours or 24 hours. Hence, I use cycle because there are 7 cycles of 24 hours within the week. So I hope this can be acceptable to you. Matthew 28:1. In the end of the Shabbat, as it began to dawn. We note the end and the dawn are synonymous. They go together. Dawn, that word there is, the Greek word is epiphosko. That is how we get the dawn word. And what does it mean? It means to grow light. Now that's the exact opposite than what sunset does, because after the sunset, it grows dark. But Matthew wrote epiphosko, to grow light. Is Matthew 28:1, is that a standalone mistranslation? If the suggestion that there might be scriptural support for a Shabbat ending at dawn in the Messianic Testament, would this trigger a hot spark of interest in you? Would the testament recorded in Luke be the first, or with the first Shabbat of the crucifixion week, beginning at dawn, would that provide some permissible evidence for dawn-to-dawn Shabbat cycles in the crucifixion account? Charlene and I have always agreed that the crucifixion or the Passion Week with Yahuwah and Yahusha has the last say in all things. Yahusha lived out the word with exact perfection. So what happens there as an example is foundational. Perhaps we first need to search out Matthew 28:1 to remind ourselves of the words written there. These words are preserved for our understanding. Suggestions abound relating ideas that Matthew 28:1 has been mistranslated and does not actually mean what the words literally read in our scriptures. Here is a verse that is very profound and directly addresses the situation. 2 Timothy 3:16. All scripture is breathed by Elohim and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for setting straight, and for instruction in righteousness. So I ask you, is Matthew 28:1, is it also profitable for teaching? How about for reproof? And what about setting straight? And what about instruction in righteousness? Can we count on Matthew 28:1, or has it been mistranslated? We're going to look at this a little closer, well, quite a bit closer. When full support is provided, starting from the Torah and continuing through the life of Yahusha on this earth, there will then be sufficient evidence shown us to be able to answer a resounding yes to all of the above questions. Matthew 28:1. In the end of the Shabbat, as it began to dawn, towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene. The end of the Shabbat is identified with a very specific descriptive word which provides an atmospheric state of being of the Shabbat's ending. And yes, I use that terminology very purposely. What happened in the atmosphere at the end of the Shabbat? We need to look to that word epiphosko. Epiphosko, G2020. It has a most peculiar meaning of to grow light or lighting up. According to the words written in Matthew 28:1, in the end of the Shabbat, Matthew recorded that the atmosphere had begun to physically grow light. Growing light occurs at dawn, not at sunset. To properly understand this text, we must first understand the scripture's witnesses on the topic of the evening. Also, we will look at several witnesses that will positively determine the format of the 24-hour cycles leading up to Matthew 28:1. And there we will be describing the final minutes of the Shabbat. There is a certain necessity to understand Erev correctly. When the verb Erev is applied to the context of time, and that is specifically the 7 cycles of the week, what then is the real-time result? A closer look at Erev. In the Hebrew Evan Bohan edition of Matthew 27:57, we see the word Erev, which translated to English is evening. This word Erev is the word that by Hebrew definition requires a mixing action to whatever the application is referring to. So I ask you, can a single element provide a mixing action? Does it mix with itself? Or does there need to be 2 elements to provide a mixing action? Does light have to be first so that it can mix with the darkness to provide an Erev? We're going to look at this. When the context is time, as in 1 cycle of the week, the definition precisely designates the period when the sun has set and the indirect residual sunlight is allowed to mix with the approaching darkness. And yes, indirect residual sunlight, that is what can mix with the darkness. When there is direct sunlight, when the sun is visible in the sky, it is impossible for the darkness to overtake it. It is only when the sun has removed itself from the visible sky that the darkness can overtake it. It is this mixing action after the sunset that creates the evening twilight. And there is also a mixing action before sunrise too. Let's look at Matthew's description of the end of the Shabbat. And the premier question is, at what time did Yosef of Ramathaim ask for Pilate's approval to receive the lifeless body of Yahusha for burial? We will look at Matthew again and work through it. Matthew 27:57. And when evening came, there's that word evening, that is the mixture, and that will reference the mixture of light and darkness, what we're going to see in a little bit. And when evening came, there came a rich man from Ramathaim named Yosef, who himself had also become a taught one of Yahusha. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Yahusha. Then Pilate commanded the body to be given. Note that the Hebrew edition of Matthew 27:57 also declares it was evening, or Erev, H 61:54, when Yosef asked for the body of Yahusha. Remember, Pilate still had to get physical confirmation that indeed Yahusha had already died, and this was after the sun had set. Hence, he sent a soldier to ascertain this information. This request for confirmation of death occurred after the sunset, according to the Hebrew meaning of the word Erev. The definition of evening becomes extremely important at this point, so let's have a look at it. Here's a bit of a visual first. Is Yahusha dead already? Matthew 27, 46 to 50. Yahusha died at the 9th hour from dawn. And there we see the red marker. That's the point where there is 9 hours from dawn. For that's what's written in the scriptures, that Yahusha died at the 9th hour. Then come along the sunset and the evening mixture. Joseph requested the body of Yahusha after sunset, at evening, and that is in the mixing, according to the definition. You find that again in Matthew 27, 57, and 58. That was still Abib 14 night. And Pilate marveled if he were already dead. And calling unto him the centurion, he asked him whether he had been any while dead. And remember, this was after the sun had set. Some extremely pivotal concepts concerning Erev have been brought to the surface. Let's begin to back them up. Here's a Hebrew lexicon by John Parkhurst. It's from 1762. And I'm going to read the red lettered words. Begins to mix, which mixture continues till night, and the mixture of daylight ceases. Here's another lexicon by W.H. Barker from 1776. Again, the yellow highlighted words. Mix, mingle, when darkness mixes. To be intermixed, a mixed multitude, it being of a mixed color, pale on one side and green on the other. I think we should be getting the idea that Erev has a mixture action. It is a verb. It's not a time frame. It's a verb of what is happening at that moment. Here's the etymological dictionary of the Hebrew language. And I'd like to take you to the right-hand side, if you can see my cursor. This word woof right here. When I come to this word, it raised my attention. I had never seen a woof before. I've heard it. I've had dogs, and they say woof all the time. But what is a woof? We go to the Webster's Dictionary. Woof, to weave the threads that cross the warp, the weft. That indeed provides us with a mixture or a mixing action interwoven between the threads. Strong's down here says woof, mixed multitude, mingled people. Also a mixture, mingled people. OT 6148, Arav, a primitive root. This is to braid, to intermix. Note, the variety of meanings for OT 6154 strongly suggests a mixing and a mingling. That's because in Hebrew, OT 6154 is a cognate with 6153, meaning there will be very, very close similarities. Now, I have gone over this quickly because we have covered this many, many times in many studies. So if you need to look at this again, I invite you to go to our website and go over this carefully. Here we see the Hebrew and English lexicon of the Old Testament by William Gesenius. Again, look at the pink words. Mix, mixture, and there is woof again, as mixed, interwoven, and mix. It follows along the same theme. Clearly, in the Hebrew definitions for Erev, or evening as we hear in English, we see a foundation of mixing. Yes, it pertains directly to light and darkness mixing together in a progressive action culminating in full darkness. This mixing activity cannot occur until the sun has removed itself from the horizon and the direct rays of light are absent. It is the definition of darkness that explains that darkness is the absence of light. The mixing with evening light cannot occur before the sunset. I'm going to read that again. The mixing with the evening light and the darkness cannot occur before sunset. With this in mind, Matthew 27:57, Joseph went to Pilate when the early evening mixing of light and darkness had arrived. Yes, it was after sunset. Joseph asked for the body of Yahusha at evening time, according to the words written in the Hebrew and the Greek. The direct sunlight had vanished, and the mixing of light with darkness had begun. The task of preparing the body by necessity continued throughout the night season of Abib 14. Yes, you read that correctly. It was not Abib 15, and it was not the first Sabbath of unleavened bread when they were wrapping him in the spices and the linen. It was Abib 14. It was the preparation night. We will first look at the definition of the Greek word opsios. Then we will look at Mark's recordings of this same event. Will Mark place the acquisition of Yahusha's lifeless body before the sunset, allowing for a lightning-quick pre-sunset burial, as sunset theory insists upon? That's what I was taught for many, many years, that Yahusha was in the tomb before sunset. That's what I was taught. And I believed it because the person that taught it was a preacher, and I just accepted it. But that's not what's written in the scriptures. Let's first examine the rule of first mention for a better understanding of Mark. Question: what is the rule of first mention? The Hebrew record of Matthew defines even as erev, H6153, the mixing after the sun has set. There are 15 matches for opsios, G3798, in the Gospels. The first usage in Mark 1:32 defines how opsios is to be understood in all the Gospels. Verse 32 is an example of the rule of first mention. And note, only Luke uses hespera, G2073, one time. And the first definition is evening, not afternoon. We are now ready for a closer examination of the opsios definition. Here the Greek word opsios, which has been translated to even and evening, and that's what we hear and read in English. Even and evening in Greek is G3798, opsios, and it is from G3796. It was late and feminine, and as a noun. Note this word, afternoon. Notice the question mark. Why is afternoon there? And it goes to early evening or nightfall, evening or evening tide. Can you see the argument will inevitably arise that according to the Greek definition, the word opsios is shown to mean afternoon? Yes, indeed, it does show this. We are now seeing a trace of linear Greek mindset received from the contaminated and abominable Pharisees' teachings that Yahusha so strongly witnessed against. But this is fine. With your close scrutiny of the upcoming examination in the detailed recordings of Mark, Luke, John, and the women, it will become brilliantly apparent that only one meaning is possible. The erev can only mean after the sun has set. The very actions and recorded declarations will stand out for all to see. Please pay very careful attention to this matter. It will expose itself. Because we've moved from the Hebrew mindset in Matthew to the Greek writings, that does not mean that Joseph asked for the body of Yahusha earlier in the cycle. Mark 1:32. This demonstrates the rule of first mention. Notice it's in chapter 1. He does this right away so that we understand what we need to know. And at even, and what does he say when even is? At even, when the sun did set. I hope we do not mistake this. The even, according to Mark, is when the sun has removed itself. There is no longer full direct sun rays, and the light at that time can be mixed with the darkness. I'll read this again. And at even, when the sun did set, they brought unto him all that were diseased. Even though Opsios, G3798, has afternoon as the first definition and nightfall and evening listed second, Mark declares for all 6 references in his book, Opsios, or even, is to always be understood as the mixing after sunset. This agrees with Matthew and with John. Now, I want to go on a little bit of a side note here. Many times we have people say, wow, I've never seen the sunset to sunset demonstrated in the scriptures, or the dawn to dawn. How come we don't read about it? Let's look at this verse again, Mark 1:32. And at even, when the sun did set, they brought unto him all that were diseased. And it continues on, and it talks about Yahusha healing whole villages after the sun had set. And if you do a study on this, you'll realize that when he healed whole villages after the sun had set, there was not a problem. Yet when he healed before sunset, the Pharisees adamantly and emphatically wanted to kill him. Why? Because they were observing sunset to sunset Sabbaths. Just another thing that can be searched out on your search for the dawn to dawn Shabbat and days of the week as written in creation. Okay, that side note's done. Let's continue on. Opsios, or Hespera. Which word is best? Why was Hespera not used over Opsios if it has the proper first definition? It is very likely that Opsios was the more common word during that time. Mark's gospel was written about 50 to 70 AD. By this time, Mark would have discovered that if Opsios was used in his work, he had to define the exact terminology to be used to eliminate any misunderstanding. This is why the rule of first mention is extremely important. We are now equipped to carry this study further. What occurs at and after sunset? The indirect sunlight season, or the evening twilight, mixes with the encroaching darkness and it grows dark. The base definition of darkness is the absence of light, and that is exactly what transpires when the sun disappears below the horizon and it grows dark. So what really happened during the crucifixion week? Did the Shabbat suddenly change from the format displayed in Genesis 1? Or is Matthew actually correct in his assessment of time? And I'm referring to the word epiphosko when he said the end of the Sabbath grew light. Is he correct? According to sunset theory, immediately when the Shabbat has ended, at the moment of sunset, the sky would commence to grow dark. That is sunset theory. Sabbath would grow dark after the sun had set. You need to think about that. Is this what we read in the scriptures? Did Matthew record the Shabbat grew dark? Or did he record that it grew light? What about that word, epiphosko, to grow light? Is this what the original Hebrew script tells us in Matthew 28:1? What about the original Hebrew manuscript? Does it support the Shabbat growing dark? Has tradition been faithful to the word of Yahuwah? Will you be willing to look at further support from Luke? It is recorded in Matthew 28:1, the end of the Shabbat. The Greek word recorded for end is ops. Look at what is documented in a research source concerning this word. In the brown box, we see it means evening. In the blue box, we see it means dawn. Here we see two totally opposite time frames. Please notice I used that word time frames. I use this very, very specifically for a reason. One time frame is evening. The other time frame is dawn. So which one is it? Can it be both? Or is there some confusion here? Dawn and evening time frames are not the same. The Greek information does not provide the reasoning by definition how these two times are identified, supplying time frames only. It then becomes easy to subtly adjust the evening time frame to suit a particular religion's sunset belief structure. One time frame grows light and the other grows dark. The Hebrew erev is a verb providing a definitive action description. The Greek word is an adjective, supplying but a generalized opaqueness. So what if we're given the word evening? And we in English, we just read evening and we go, oh yeah, that's late, that's late in the evening before darkness. And what happens there? Well, the sun's going down. Okay, fair enough. But doesn't the sun go down in the afternoon too? Doesn't the sun go down in the sky? Okay, well, maybe what we've been taught or what we've been told that there is a first evening in the afternoon because the sun is going down in the sky visually. Maybe there is a first evening in the afternoon. And the subtle change comes into our knowledge. But what if we looked at this and we said evening, erev, Hebrew, mixture, and then we say, is there a mixture of light and darkness in the afternoon? No. The darkness cannot invade direct sunlight. So how can there be an evening in the afternoon? So I just hope that you question this, because I was taught this, that there was an evening in the afternoon. I was taught this. And it's time that we question this. Let's get back to the Hebrew. Let's get back to the definitions and apply the definitions to our belief structure. The first action will be to look at a graphic of Matthew 28:1, so we are all on the same page. We will be concerned with only the first part of the verse, as the lady's action has no direct consequential bearing on the timing of the Shabbat at this point in the study. Matthew 28:1. In the end of the Shabbat, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene. And here's what the scripture's proposal is. On the left, you will see the dawn, then the twilight and the Shabbat light season, then the sunset and the twilight and the Shabbat night season. This is the 24 hours of the seventh Shabbat cycle. This is what the scripture proposes. Then comes dawn, which ends the day and starts the first cycle of the week. Matthew writes, in the end of the Shabbat. This is where he writes, it grew light. So we need to question, is he right or is he wrong? Does it grow light at dawn? As it began to dawn, that is epiphosko, to grow light toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene. So let's look at sunset theory's proposal. Matthew 28:1, same verse, same words. In the end of the Shabbat, as it began to dawn, that is grow light, towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene. Look carefully at this chart. This is designed after sunset to sunset theory, where the night season leads out first and the light light season follows afterwards. The Sabbath, according to sunset theory, ends at sunset. And I ask you, does it grow light at sunset? Is epiphosko the correct word to be using at the end of this Sabbath? Yet Matthew wrote, the end of the Sabbath grows light. Is that in agreement with sunset to sunset Sabbath? I ask you, where does sunset to sunset Sabbaths come from? Is this portion of time after the sunset, is it growing light? Epiphosko? Is there a light discrepancy problem here? Is it growing light or is it growing darkness? We need to think carefully on this subject. Are we observing the Shabbat according to man's tradition, or are we going to observe the Shabbat according to the way that creation was outlined with a dawn-to-dawn Shabbat? Or is it a simple case of a gross mistranslation in Matthew? Do we have other witnesses? At this point, it becomes necessary to look at other sources of information within the scriptures. No, not elsewhere, within the scriptures, for support of one or the other concept. Does the Shabbat start and end at dawn, or is it sunset, like most have been taught for years? I was taught that. Yes, and I observed sunset Shabbats for a great many years. Sad to say, but I just accepted what was taught from the pulpit. I have now learned to question what I was taught. Is there another place in the scriptures where the word epiphosko is used? Yes, indeed, there is another location, and Luke is the author. Will Luke use this word epiphosko correctly? Let's look at it, shall we? Luke 23:54. And that day was the preparation, and the Shabbat drew on. G2020, that word is epiphosko. What is the definition? By Strong's, to begin to grow light, begin to dawn. Brown Driver Briggs, epiphosko, to grow light, to dawn. Thayer's Lexicon, epiphosko, to grow light, to dawn. Matthew 28:1 and Luke 23:54 are the only places in the whole scripture where this word is used. Since the idea of growing light seems prevalent, we should look at Luke and see if the record or the recorded events there allow this concept without convoluting the scriptures. But first, I have a question. Did Joseph request the body of Yahusha prior to or after the sunset? You got to think carefully on this one. Matthew 27:57 again. When the even, or that's the twilight mixture, when the even was come, there came a rich man of Arimathea named Joseph, who also himself was Yahusha's disciple. He went to Pilate and begged the body of Yahusha. Then Pilate commanded the body to be delivered. Yes, the Hebrew edition of Matthew shows the Hebrew word erev here as well. As we have learned, erev can only signify the mixing time of light and darkness, which by default can be one of the two twilight mixtures. Because we know Yahusha died at the 9th hour from dawn, and that is 3 p.m., we then understand that this erev twilight indicated was the period after the sun had already set. What does Mark indicate for us? Has Mark positively defined his words so we make no mistake? Mark classified even. When is this according to his understanding? Mark 1:32, we're going to read this again. And at even, when the sun did set, they brought unto him all that were diseased and them that were possessed with devils. Remember that rule of first mention? Mark is very certain that the evening twilight arrives only after the sun has set and the direct sunlight rays have been withdrawn. What about the evening of the crucifixion? Is it the same? Can we count on this word evening being after the sunset? What is Mark's declaration concerning the timing of the burial event? Yes, it was still Abib 14. And what does he say? And now when the even was come, yes, that is after the sunset, because it was the preparation, and I have added the word still, it was still the preparation. Mark is telling you that Abib 14 did not change to Abib 15 after the sun had set. He is telling you, after the sun had set, it was still the preparation. What better time was there for the body of Yahusha to be prepared for burial than on the preparation night season? After the sunset, still the preparation. Yes, this is a cornerstone piece of the puzzle, a cornerstone of the calendar. We need to understand this very, very clearly. It was still the preparation, and it was what? The day before the Shabbat. How can it be before? I was taught that sunset changed the day. Well, we go to scriptures, and it's the dawn. So Mark is telling us the preparation night was before the Shabbat, which come at dawn. This here will annihilate the Friday crucifixion right here, if we pay attention. Mark 15:43. Joseph of Arimathea, an honorable counselor, which also waited for the kingdom of Elohim, came and went in boldly unto Pilate, and craved the body of Yahusha. Joseph requested the body of Yahusha after the sun had set. Now the preparation for burial could begin. Joseph had not requested the body of Yahusha until after the sunset on Abib 14, and it was still the preparation. Please don't forget this. This is what the scriptures say. Once again, the sunset failed to change the 24-hour period. And I ask you, how many times can an institution of Yahuwah fail before we suspect something? Question: was there any more suitable cycle than the preparation of the Passover to prepare Yahusha's body, which was the Passover lamb antitype for burial? Is it possible that Yahuwah had already orchestrated this spectacular timing? Didn't he say it was from the foundations of this earth? It was planned from before this earth was even made. Here's a visual review of two witnesses. Joseph had not requested the body of Yahusha until after the sun had set. On the left, we see it was Abib 14 light season. The sunset came along, and then comes the twilight, and that is when Joseph asked for the body of Yahusha. It was still Abib 14 night season. The sunset did not change anything. And Mark's witness, Mark 15:42, and now, when the even was come, that is the twilight, when the even was come, because it was the preparation, that is the day before the Shabbat. And the second witness, Matthew 27:57. And when evening came, he went to Pilatus and asked for the body of Yahusha. There is two witnesses that the body of Yahusha was not requested until after the sunset. Remember, we have just seen two witnesses that Yahusha was removed from the tree after the sun had set. The sunset had failed to change the 24-hour cycle. With this information just received or just viewed, let's analyze the word epiphosko as recorded by Luke. Did Luke use it correctly? Will Luke give us another witness? Epiphosko, to grow light. Joseph's request, Luke 23:50. And behold, there was a man named Joseph, a counselor, and he was a good man and a just. The same had not consented to the counsel and deed of them. He was of Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who also himself waited for the kingdom of Yahuwah. This man went unto Pilate and begged the body of Yahusha. By two witnesses thus far, we understand that the body of Yahusha was requested after the sun had set. With that in mind, when Joseph requested the body of Yahusha, by two testimonies, this would then be after the sunset. That in turn would indicate that the burial process of Yahusha occurred through the night season, and that would be the Abib 14 preparation night season. Did Luke use epiphosko incorrectly? Luke 23:53. And he took it down and wrapped it in linen and laid it in a sepulchre that was hewn in stone, wherein never man before was laid. Joseph requested and prepared the body of Yahusha in Abib 14 night season. The date had not changed. Luke 23:54. And that day was the preparation. Luke is very, very clear. It was not the unleavened bread Sabbath, Abib 15. He's very clear. The sunset did not change the day. What does he say? And the Shabbat drew on. There's that word, epiphosko, grew light, or to grow light. This can only happen at dawn. Does this work with the scriptures? The Sabbath drew on. It grew light at dawn. What has Luke established as one of the 6 crucifixion witnesses? The preparation day occurred from dawn to dawn. 4 of the witnesses are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. What is Mark's next witness for dawn to dawn? Continuing further with Mark's witness, talking to the ladies here. How often does a lady purchase a wedding dress before she's engaged? And men? When does a man purchase insurance for a car and then go looking for a suitable ride to acquire? Did Joseph purchase fine linen before sunset? Did Joseph purchase fine linen before he received Pilate's approval for Yahusha's body? Mark 15:46. And he, Joseph, bought fine linen and took him down and wrapped him in the linen and laid him in a sepulchre which was hewn out of a rock and rolled a stone unto the door of the sepulchre. Here we go. This is formed in sunset theory. Please note that the night season comes first, right after sunset. And we're going to look at Joseph buying fine linen. Here we see where Yahusha expired at 3 p.m. or the 9th hour from dawn. And we understand from 2 witnesses that Yahusha's body was not requested until after the sun had set. Again, and he, Joseph, bought fine linen. When did he buy fine linen? The body was not even requested until after the sun had set. Did Joseph purchase linen on the Shabbat of unleavened bread? For that's what it would be according to sunset theory, because their sunset is supposed to change the day from Abib 14 to the Abib 15th, the Shabbat. Did he purchase linen on the Shabbat? You have just personally witnessed another reason why it is that sunset theory needs a pre-sunset burial. Oops. If the sunset changed the cycle of a week, then Yosef, by purchasing the linen, had just broken the sunset theory Shabbat. By default of the sunset, the Shabbat of unleavened bread would have begun, and Yosef would have purchased the linen on the Shabbat. Since this burial process was planned and prophesied from the foundations of the earth, can Yahuwah be accused of setting up Yosef to sin when he purchased linen after the sunset, therefore breaking the Shabbat? Or, by Yahuwah's word, can it be shown that the sunset failed to change the date at sunset? And I say, count on it. May I submit to you the dawn-to-dawn format as found in Genesis 1. There on the left, we see dawn. We see the 9 hours from dawn. The red marker is where Yahusha expired. Matthew 27:57. Will we find alignment here? And evening having come, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also himself was discipled to Yahusha. Having gone near to Pilate, asked for himself the body of Yahusha. Then Pilate commanded the body to be given back. And we read again in Mark 15:46. And he, Joseph, bought fine linen and took him down and wrapped him in the linen and laid him in a sepulchre which was hewn out of a rock and rolled a stone unto the door of the sepulchre. Interesting, if we accept the words of the scriptures, then Joseph did not break the Shabbat because he purchased fine linen on the preparation night of Abib 14, the burial night. There is no problem with the Torah. It is scripture fulfillment, once again. And here is a marked cross-check for you. Marked because it comes from Mark. Mark 15:42. And now, when the even was come, because it was the preparation, that is the day before the Shabbat, and if you carefully think about this, you will note that sunset theory is destroyed right here in this verse, destroyed and annihilated completely. Verse 43, Joseph of Arimathea, an honorable counselor, which also waited for the kingdom of Yahuwah, came and went in boldly unto Pilate and craved the body of Yahusha. And Pilate marveled if he were already dead, and called unto him the centurion. He asked him whether he had been any while dead. And when he knew it of the centurion, he gave the body to Joseph. And he bought the fine linen, and took him down, and wrapped him in the linen, and laid him in a sepulchre, which was hewn out of a rock, and rolled a stone unto the door of the sepulchre. Again, we look at Mark's witness. Complete linear fulfillment. Perfect. Just like what the Torah asked and required. The documented sequence of events all show the purchase of the linen was after the sunset. This purchase of linen would have immediately followed an approval from Pilate to Joseph. This approval to receive the precious body could only come after he, Pilate, had learned of Yahusha's death, which was after the sunset in the evening twilight. Do take a moment to ponder. Did Joseph transgress this Shabbat commandment or not? How long does it take to purchase linen, retrieve a precious body from suspension on a tree? And yes, it was indeed a very precious body. It was handled with extreme care, perfectly done. It was not thrown down onto the ox cart. It was taken down and carefully laid. and then transported to a cleaning facility. Then washed the sun hardened clots of blood from the lash wounds and the pores and the sweaty, bloody, knotted hair. How long does it take to wash blood that has been dried and caked in the sun from hair? Does it happen very rapidly before sunset? Or is it something that takes time, especially from this precious body? A friend of mine, his lifetime career as a nurse gets a bit emphatic when suggestions arise that the body of Yahusha could have been washed in a short time before burial prior to the sunset. He insists that it takes quite a long time to clean bodies retrieved from traumatic events. Yes, the meticulous wrapping of the body in spices and perfumes. Do you think that happens in a few minutes? No. They still had to transport it to the tomb and the placing of the body according to Jewish protocol. What is that Jewish protocol as recorded in the scriptures? That body had to be clean. It had to be perfectly clean, to the point where as if they were to bring that body into the tabernacle, it would not be defiled. So you can be absolutely sure that it was meticulously cleaned. Did it take a few minutes before sunset? Yahusha's burial before sunset and the first Shabbat of unleavened bread? Not a chance, according to Mark. Have you previously realized that John implicitly delivers to us two witnesses? The first one, the preparation in the light season, and still the preparation in the night season of Abib 14. John's qualification at dawn. Note, it was the 6th hour from midnight, and that is Roman reckoning. John 19:14, and it was the preparation of the Passover, and as it were, the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, Lo, your king. John is counting from midnight. He is writing to a readership in Antioch. They are of a Roman heritage. They understand the Roman time frame. Hence, he writes to them in a terminology that they can understand. That is why he says it started at the 6th hour. If you want more on that, we do have more information, and you can ask about that later. John 19:30. So when Yahusha took the sour wine, he said, It has been accomplished. And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. When he said, It has been accomplished, what was it? What is he referencing? Did he not say, I am here to do the will of my Father? It has been accomplished. He completed the will of his Father. Every statute, without exception, was completed in absolute perfection to a point that we cannot even comprehend. John 19:31. Therefore, since it was the preparation that the bodies should not remain on the stake on the Shabbat, for that Shabbat was a high one, the Yehudim asked Pilate to have their legs broken and that they be taken away. Abib 14, it was the preparation. John announces it at dawn. That is John's first witness for Abib 14. And yes, that Shabbat is the one and only high Shabbat of the year. It is the first Shabbat, the first annual Shabbat of the worship cycles in the year. That's why it's called the high Shabbat. John continues, and Charlene, I just about forgot to ask you if you would like to read the next few slides for me. Are you there?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
It's always a joy to read John, because if there's any book that settles the question, it's going to be the book of John. So listen to these verses from John 19, 32 onward. Therefore the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who was impaled with him. But when they came to Yahusha and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and instantly blood and water came out. And he who has seen has witnessed. He's talking about himself, John, and his witness is true. John was there to witness. And he knows that he is speaking the truth. Why? In order that you might believe. For this took place in order for the scripture to be filled. Not one of his bones shall be broken, as it's told to us in Psalms 34:20. In verse 37, and again, another scripture says, they shall look on him whom they have pierced, in Zechariah 12:10. And we'll continue reading on in John, because it's really important to pay attention to what he has to say. In verse 38, and after this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a taught one of Yahusha, but secretly, for fear of the Yehudim, asked Pilate that he might take the body of Yahusha. And Pilate gave permission. Therefore, he came and took the body of Yahusha. Now, I want you to remember, we have just seen 3 witnesses that Joseph requested the body of Yahusha. And when was it? The request was after the sun had set. Verse 39, and Nicodemus, who at first came to Yahusha by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. Then they took the body of Yahusha. They bound it in linen wrappings with the spices, as was the habit of the Yehudim for burial. And just imagine how long that would have taken. In verse 41, and at the place where he was impaled, there was a garden, and in the garden a fresh tomb in which no one had yet been laid. So John is giving us a really good report of what's happening. Don't forget, his was the last book written, so he's going to get the facts straight. So here, attention everyone, John has just witnessed to us in verse 14 that the preparation cycle had begun at the 6th hour. This is Roman reckoning, and that would be at dawn. 6 hours from midnight would bring you up to the dawn hour. So the sunset had occurred. Joseph then asked Yahusha for his body. The night season of the preparation for that burial was then fulfilled. So here's a question. Does John then declare that this time period, this night season, is a Shabbat? Is that what he's saying? Let's read John 19:42 again. There then, because of the preparation day of the Yehudim, they laid Yahusha because the tomb was near. So the answer to the question, no. John has just pronounced that this burial night season as inclusive with the former light season. That means the night season and the light season go together on the same cycle. The sunset is long gone, and it is still the preparation day. John has it right.
Thank you, Charlene. Appreciate that. This verse, John 19:42, could this be worthy of a side note? I read it again, John 19:42. There, then, because of the preparation of the Yehudim, could it be, is it possible? Has John positively identified the exact year of the crucifixion with this verse? The exact year? Is he giving us a time frame, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 years? Or is he pinpointing the year? I want you to think about this. There's going to be more to come on this. Why does John appear to duplicate his declaration of the preparation? First at dawn, in verse 14, and again in verse 42. Why? John is expressing to the reader that indeed the lunar Abib 14 Passover of the Jews was about to commence after the sun had set. When? That very cycle. I cannot stress the importance of this when you're thinking of the crucifixion and the calendar. This verse is, to me, it rates up there among the top 5 verses for calendar. We'll be speaking more in this a little bit later. Has Yahusha, who is the Word, has he in his death achieved fulfillment of Yahuwah's statutes? John documents that indeed the preparing of the body and the placing of Yahusha in the tomb, properly taken care of and out of sight, occurred before morning arrived. Why is this detail important? How about the statutes? Exodus 12:10. And do not leave of it until morning, and what remains of it until morning you are to burn with fire. And if any of the flesh of the ordination offerings or of the bread be left over until the morning, then you shall burn up what is left over. It is not eaten because it is set apart. The scriptural pattern of these sacrificial statutes must be upheld to fulfill every antitype for the Messiah. John has assured us that the body of Yahusha was secured out of sight before the boker grew light, or epiphosko. Once again, we see complete and total Torah statute fulfillment. If there wasn't, we wouldn't have a Mashiach. But Yahusha said, it has been accomplished. Those words assure us of his perfection. The remains of the sacrifice must be properly disposed of before the first light of dawn started the new cycle of the week, Exodus 12:10. The body of Yahusha needed to be placed in the proper location, and we find out more on that in the red heifer study, in the proper location, out of sight, before the preparation cycle ended, and the first Shabbat of unleavened bread commenced. Yahusha, he was buried before the epiphosko, or before the first light of the high Shabbat of unleavened bread, which began when? At dawn. Yahusha was buried before that. What about the ladies? Is there more witnesses for dawn to dawn? We're going to be looking more at what the ladies did. Luke 23:54. And that day was the preparation, and the Shabbat drew on, epiphosko, to grow light. And the women also which came with him from Galilee followed after, and beheld the sepulchre, and how his body was laid. Why is it told to us that the ladies were from Galilee? Are there any idle words in the scriptures? When we understand the ladies were from Galilee, what does that mean to us? Remember, the people from Galilee observed dawn to dawn. That is one of the reasons why Yahusha felt so much more comfortable there, because they didn't want to kill him. They observed dawn to dawn there. And remember, 11 of the disciples were from Galilee area. They observed dawn to dawn. So what need would there be for Yahusha to reprimand his disciples when they all observed dawn to dawn? This is the importance of understanding Galilee. Yahusha was buried before the first light of the unleavened bread, High Shabbat. In final respect, the ladies observed his body before the dawn of the unleavened bread, Shabbat. You have witnessed a scriptural dawn-to-dawn coverage for 24 hours, dawn to dawn of Abib 14, preparation of the Passover. And yes, the night season was still the preparation. Sunset did not change the day. Remember Mark 7:9. The Pharisees, not being content to abide by the scripture, were operating and worshiping on their own traditional schedule. What were Yahusha's words to the Pharisees? And Charlene said to me once, I think this is your favorite verse. Yes, it is one that I use quite a bit because the meaning in this, the depth of this is absolutely astronomical once you start applying it to calendar. John 7:19, did not Moshe give you the Torah? Remember, he's speaking to the Pharisees right now. Yet not one of you does the Torah. If we go to this, and he says, why do you seek to kill me? If we go to this chapter, timing is the context. Timing. Not one of you does the Torah. And yet we have been inundated with suggestions to go to this belief structure and take on their tradition. No, thank you for my life. The Pharisees were on a sunset to sunset schedule. And if you want to see more on that, ask for Yahusha's Contempt PowerPoint for further study on this factor. This sunset to sunset system is attached at the hip to the lunar-based calendar. More of Yahusha's words to the Pharisees and Sadducees, John 8:39. They answered and said to him, Abraham is our father. Yahusha said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. Evidently, they were not. Yahusha just told them in John 7:19 that not one of them follows the Torah. So why do we look to this area to get our belief system, to find truth? Is Yahusha's words not strong enough for us? Are we paying attention, or are we looking elsewhere? Does the Messianic Testament actually make a point to expose in writing Yahusha's distinction between those who observe according to the Torah and those who do not? Let's look at it. Now let's give very careful heed to the wording of this next verse, John 19:42. There, then, because of the preparation day of the Yahudim, they laid Yahusha because the tomb was near. Remember John has just mentioned at dawn that it was the preparation of the Pesach at dawn. What is John telling us now? There then, because of the preparation of the Yahudim. Why does John mention this? What is he telling us? Here is the worthy side note, what I consider very, very worthy. John 19:42. There then, because of the preparation day of the Yahudim, this verse also proves the year of Common Era 30, and which I deem Covenant Calendar 31, that Yahusha died. Simply by John declaring the preparation of the festival of the Yahudim, it solidifies that their lunar-based festival was indeed functioning 12 hours out of sync alongside the covenant calendar. Let it be known that there is no other year other than Common Era 30 which can expose this intertwining of calendars or the dovetailing of events. We are told that on the lunar calendar, Common Era 30 has the Passover on the midst of the week. And yes, indeed it does on the midst of the week in Common Era of 28. So we are told, we are inundated with suggestions that Common Era 28 is the year that Yahusha died. But when you lay down the covenant calendar of the Melchizedek covenant side by side, you will see that the Passover in Common Era 30 of the covenant calendar is 5 days apart. How is it then that these verses, which indicate a 12-hour separation, the actions, the declarations of the Pharisees, how can it be applied to Common Era 28? It cannot. There is 5 days separation, and it does not allow for scriptural alignment. It simply cannot be. So this verse here, John 19:42, in my estimation, is among the top 5 verses, one of the cornerstones of calendar. This is ultra, ultra important when you're considering the year that Yahusha died. John 19:42, the preparation day of the Yehudim. John knew when the covenant preparation of the Passover began. He announced it as such when? At dawn in John 19:14. At the 6th hour, midnight. Yes, that is Roman reckoning. Why then does John now declare the preparation night season as the preparation of the Yehudim? Please allow me to submit to you that the Yehudim were observing their preparation for the Passover starting at sunset. Can we achieve more verification from the scriptures on this? Let's have a look. Abib 14, the 24 hours of covenant preparation of the Passover. On the left, you'll see the 9th hour red marker where Yahusha expired. I want you to remember this format. Yahusha died at the 9th hour from dawn on Abib 14. Compare this date. You see Abib 14, I have it highlighted in yellow. Compare this date with the Feast of the Yehudim. Note the terminology, Feast of the Yehudim. Note the change in date that sunset to sunset brings. You're going to see this in a couple slides. I'm just pointing out where to look at this moment. For this next slide, remember that Caiaphas was an impostor high priest. And this is very important. This next slide is formatted in sunset to sunset theory. So look at this date of the 13th. Remember, this is formatted in sunset to sunset theory. According to the Pharisees, it was the 13th of Abib when Yahusha was suffocating and being tortured on the tree. It was not there, or it was not Abib 14 in their lunar calendar. Matthew 26:3. Then the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people came together at the court of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and plotted to seize Yahusha by trickery, to seize Yahusha by trickery and kill him. But they said, please note these words, not at the festival, lest there be an uproar among the people. This is the light season that Yahusha was crucified. On covenant calendar, it was Abib 14. But on the lunar-based calendar of the Pharisees, it was only Abib 13 when Yahusha was crucified. Is it any wonder why many of the people missed this sign? Because the deception of the lunar calendar had taken the wool over their eyes, and they could not recognize who was being crucified. But it's not an excuse. They had the scriptures, and they should have been studying. But let's give credit due to these Pharisees. When they said they would not capture Yahusha at the festival, they did not capture Yahusha at their Passover of or Feast of the Yahudim, for it only began after the sun had set. Yahusha was already dead. Their Passover Feast of the Yahudim began after the sun had set. So yes, indeed, the Pharisees stood up to their declaration, not at the festival. This is very, 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 very important. The Yahudim did not kill Yahusha on their feast according to their word and belief. So we must give them credit due. They stood up to their word and they held to it. Why is the factor of John documenting the Feast of the Yahudim so very significant? Yes, this is an extremely important part of the puzzle. This fills in a huge hole. Would the chief Kohanim and the Pharisees be negotiating a business deal on a Shabbat? Do we remember how emphatic they were about observing the Shabbat correctly according to all their rules which they had developed? Would they break their Shabbat? What did Matthew record? On the next day, which was after the preparation, and that is by covenant calendar, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together to Pilate. Note here, the Hebrew edition of Matthew has the word machar, from which we see next day in English. This word ensures there has been a severing of one 24-hour period and a transition into the existent one. But how? Because we know Matthew obeyed the Torah, and we know the boker, or the morning, had arrived, bringing with it a new 24-hour cycle. The ox and plow incision of boker is what performed the severing. If you question this, the ox and the plow is a definition of boker. Boker is the very first light of dawn. So what does an ox and a plow have to do with boker? What does the plow do? When you pull a plow through a field, the plow splits, divides, separates, and distinguishes. One side of the field is done, and one side of the field has yet to go. One is past, one is future. The ox and the plow of boker cut off the old 24-hour period and introduces the beginning of the new 24-hour period. Where were the chief priests and the Pharisees to be found on this next day after the preparation? They were present. Where? In the court of Pilate. What were they doing? They were negotiating out a deal to guard the tomb with Yahusha's body. This was not something they should be doing on Yahuwah's Moed, on Yahuwah's Shabbat of unleavened bread. But they did not believe in the boker changing the day. They believed in sunset to sunset. It is a deception. Was this event on a Moed according to their sunset to sunset belief structure? Well, according to their sunset to sunset, it was not on a Shabbat of unleavened bread. So let's look at it. Here is the Abib 14, according to the Melchizedek covenant, the preparation of the Passover. And I like to mention here, this Melchizedek, I spell it this way because the Hebrew word Melech is king and Zedek is righteousness. So I just bring the two together. I hope that's acceptable. Here is the Abib 14. This is the preparation of the Passover. According to the covenant calendar seen throughout the scriptures, yes, indeed, it was the high Shabbat of unleavened bread the next day, Matthew 27:62, when the chief Kohen and the Pharisees were negotiating with Pilate. Remember, dawn starts the new cycles. So on the next day, when they were in the court of Pilate negotiating a business deal, it was, according to Yahuwah, it was Abib 15, it was the high Shabbat. Remember, Yahusha said, and here's my verse, yet not one of you does the Torah. Not one. They were not an exception. They were negotiating out a deal on the Shabbat because they did not accept the Torah. They were going by sunset to sunset. And it was still, according to them, it was still the Passover. Only it was the light season of their Passover. And we are pressured into just accepting their doctrine, which is the same as today. Again, I'm bringing you to this point. Compare this date. You see the outline in yellow on 14. Compare this date with the Feast of the Yehudim, and note the change in date that sunset to sunset brings. That change will be seen in 2 slides. According to the lunar deceived Yehudim, this morning on which they were negotiating with Pilate was the second half, the light season of their lunar Passover period. Comparing these dates with the Feast of the Yehudim, note there the arrow to Abib 15, because that is going to change on the lunar-based sunset to sunset calendar. Note the change in the dates that sunset to sunset brings. The change will be seen on the next slide. There you see, this is the exact same day or light season that Yahusha was crucified. Yahusha was on the tree, his life being taken from him. And according to the lunar calendar of the Pharisees, it was Abib 13 on their Jewish lunar calendar and sunset theory. It was not the feast of Passover, according to them. Along would come the sunset, and according to their type of calendar, the sunset theory and the lunar-based system, after the sunset is the night season of Abib 14. That is the night that Yahusha was being prepared for burial. That is the beginning 12 hours of the Passover feast of the Yehudim. On the right, you will see the pink box, Abib 14 light season. This is the final 12 hours of their Pesach, or their Passover day. It is on this next morning, as recorded in the scriptures, that they were in Pilate's court. The Jews were requesting 3 cycles guard in the tomb. They were in the court of Pilate on a Shabbat, on Yahuwah's Shabbat, but not according to them. It was still the Passover, according to them. The Pharisees and their impostor high priest were operating by their lunar calendar on sunset to sunset theory. According to their traditional standards, the high Shabbat of unleavened bread did not start until the following sunset of their 14th. Therefore, in their minds, they were negotiating with Pilate for the 3 cycles of guard on the tomb on the light season of their preparation of the Passover, which followed the night of burial. According to their lunar traditions of the Yehudim, it was still the Passover cycle. Torah's dawn meant nothing to them. And can I bring up that verse one more time? Yet not one of you does the Torah. Yahusha's words ring clear and loud. Abib 13. Why was it Abib 13? They were deceived. Their Abib 14 light season came in way too late. They were deceived. They were in the court of Pilate, breaking the Shabbat. At this point, we again recall the words of Yahusha. Yet not one of you does the Torah. Why do we go there to seek information? Why do we accept their contaminated belief structure? It's time to readjust our minds back to the Torah. Is there another interesting comparison or witness of the Jews' traditional beliefs not coinciding with that of the scriptures? Let's look at the translator's comment beside Matthew 28:1 and the verse itself from the Geneva Bible. This comment is written beside the verse of Matthew 28:1 in the Geneva 1560 edition of the scriptures. Please note the translator's comments comparing Matthew's writings to the traditions of the Jews. Here it speaks of dawn to dawn. And let's read the words. I've written them down in the box so they're a little bit easier to read. The words. A. Here the evangelist reckoneth the natural day from the sun rising to the sun rising again, not as the Jews did. They began to count at the first hour after the sunset. Does it get much clearer? This is written in an old edition of the scriptures. Where has this been lost? How has it been lost? Who did the agenda to lose it? Why is it not written in our scriptures today? Note the evening. It's in italics. What does italics tell us? Italics tell us it is not foundational. It is an implication, a suggestion. It is not foundational. And yet, here it is, already in 1560. It's being suggested. On a side note, if you go down and you see that little pink circle, does anyone know what that symbol in the pink circle means? If you do, please tell me, because I have not been able to find it. The Geneva 1560 Scripture Edition declares beyond any shadow of doubt that the time frame exchange at dawn included both the end of the Shabbat and the start of the first day. There is no separation here. Let's read it. Now in the end of the Shabbat, when the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene, and it continues on. The first day of the week began to dawn, and it is at the end of the Shabbat. Please tell me, how did our spiritual leaders miss this and fail to bring us to Torah's truth? Why have we not been taught this? Why? A summary thus far. We have seen 5 witnesses for the dawn to dawn start to finish of the preparation of the Passover. 1 witness of the ladies observing Yahusha's body before the dawn light appeared, dawn to dawn. And 1 witness of the Jews observing sunset to sunset theory. What was the next event taken on by the ladies? Here we're going to have a visual. We see the preparation of the Passover. It starts at dawn. Up comes the next dawn, that is initiating the Abib 15 high Shabbat of unleavened bread. The ladies who were from Galilee observed the high Shabbat according to the Torah. How do we know that? Because the Galilean ladies observed, or the Galilean people observed dawn to dawn, and the scriptures tell us they observed the Shabbats according to the scripture. Up comes the next dawn, and it begins the Abib 16. It is the preparation for the 7th day Shabbat. It is a preparation day. And I ask you, what preparation did the ladies do on the 6th cycle to be prepared for the first cycle. What was it the ladies did? What is written in our scriptures? And when the Shabbat was passed, that is Abib 15, that is the 5th cycle of the week, when the high Shabbat was passed, what did the ladies do? Miriam from Magdala and Miriam, the mother of Yaakov, and Shelomah bought spices to go and anoint him. We find that in Mark 16:1. What? More spices after Nicodemus? There are 2 sets of spices. The first batch was supplied by Nicodemus for the wrapping of Yahusha's body in the linen. Then, Luke 23:55, and the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Note the next events carefully, remembering the events have brought the time very close to the daybreak. Luke 23:56. And having returned, and this is to honor the unleavened bread Shabbat, they prepared spices and perfumes. When? That would be on the 6th cycle, or Friday in pagan terms. And they rested on the weekly Shabbat according to the command. There it is. Luke's telling us that these ladies observed the Shabbat according to the Torah, dawn to dawn. The second batch of spices were purchased by the ladies after the first Shabbat of unleavened bread had passed. Note that the ladies were from Galilee. Why is this recorded in the scriptures? It tells us how they observed the Shabbat. They were from Galilee. The people of Galilee observed dawn to dawn. This is just one of the reasons why they were despised and trampled on by the Jews. This is another witness that the ladies rested on the feast Shabbat from dawn to dawn according to the Torah. The preparation of the 6th cycle, or Friday, began at dawn. Now, a full 24 hours was at their disposal to purchase and mix a sufficient quantity of spices to add to their fragrant perfumes to the tomb of Yahushua HaMashiach after 3 days, once the guard was removed. Is it any coincidence that the ladies were preparing spices on preparation day? Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. I don't believe in coincidence, especially from the scriptures. A question for you. How is a Friday crucifixion possible if the ladies observed Yahusha's body just before dawn of Shabbat, and then according to the gospel account, they are recorded as preparing spices before the 7th day Shabbat, and they rested on the Shabbat according to the Torah, and they managed all of this without breaking the Shabbat, and arrive at the tomb on the first cycle after the sun has risen with what? With the spices they had already prepared? To understand this tricky dilemma in detail, ask for the study, A 6th Cycle Crucifixion. Please note the spelling of crucifixion. A Friday crucifixion, as we have been taught for eons, is false. It is not scriptural, not even remotely close. Here's the visual witness from the ladies. On the left, we see the unleavened bread, Shabbat, starting at dawn. The ladies observed the body of Yahusha. Dawn arrived, and they rested on the first Shabbat of unleavened bread, according to the Torah. Luke and Mark reveal the start of the day controversy when Yahusha was on the earth. Luke is revealing this factor very clearly in documenting that the ladies from Galilee were conducting their lives according to Yahuwah's statute commands in the blood-ratified covenant. That's what we find in Exodus. These ladies did not consider the tradition of the Yehudim as their authority. They looked to the Torah. In your scriptures, when you read these phrases, or in an edition similar, according to the usual practice of the Torah, there's the authority, or according to the Torah of Yahuwah, there is the authority recorded by Luke. Or if you read in stark contrast, according to the Yehudim, or according to the practice of the festival, or as the custom of the festival, or according to the custom of the priest's office, and you'll note all those are in Luke. Let it be known that Luke is clearly distinguishing and exposing the opposing lunar-based calendar beliefs, which includes the sunset to sunset practice by the brood of adders spoken in Matthew 3 verse 7, and that is directed to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Note the terminology in Luke. This is ultra clear when Luke brings out the age of Yahusha at 12 years old, when he was in the temple 3 days after the feast of the Yahudim. And what was he doing there? Yahusha was fulfilling the statute of his father. He was observing the high Shabbat of unleavened bread. When was it? It was 3 days after the feast of the Yahudim on the lunar-based calendar. There is a difference. There was 2 calendars, and now there is many, many calendars. But the lunar calendar is a great offender. Yahusha witnessed against it, and he said so clearly in Luke 7, or in John 7. Again, a visual witness from the ladies. Number 2, look at this again. The unleavened Shabbat. It was on a 5th cycle, that is a Thursday in pagan terms, so we can recognize it. The ladies observed the body of Yahusha. Dawn arrived, and they rested on the first Shabbat of unleavened bread, according to what? According to the Torah. Dawn arrives and is Abib 16. It is the preparation for Shabbat. This is the 6th cycle of the week, Friday in pagan terms. The first Shabbat of unleavened bread ended at dawn, and the preparation for the 7th day Shabbat began, giving the ladies 24 hours of freedom to purchase and prepare their spices. They had ample time, according to the scriptures. The new spices were purchased after the unleavened bread Shabbat. You see that in Mark 16:1, and was planned for the first cycle morning duties when the Roman guard on the tomb ceased. Dawn comes along, and here is Abib 17, the 7th day Sabbath, the 7th day, the 7th cycle of the week. When and in what state does this 24-hour Shabbat cycle end? Does it end at sunset, or does it end at dawn? Before the scriptures answer our last question, at this point, we now have many witnesses for the days of the crucifixion event ending at dawn. Abib 14 through Abib 15, and also through Abib 16. Is it possible that the 7th cycle of the week, the 7th day Shabbat, spanned only 12 hours? Does the 7th day Shabbat end at sunset, as tradition has taught us? Let's look at it. What part of the Shabbat is it? Matthew 28:1, in the end of the Shabbat, as it began to epiphosko, or grow light, that is dawn, at the end of the Shabbat, as it began to dawn. And what identity was to grow light? Toward the first day of the week came Mary Magdalene to see the sepulchre. The first 24-hour cycle of the week, known to us in pagan terms as Sunday, was about to dawn. The 7th day Shabbat started at dawn and ended at dawn. The Shabbat did not, never did, nor ever will begin or end at sunset. Not in Yahuwah's kingdom. a 24-hour Shabbat or not? Is there a 24-hour Shabbat? For certain, we understand the light season as a Kodesh Shabbat of rest. Matthew has recorded this night season as the Shabbat. What about when we're told that the night season is not a Shabbat and we don't have to observe it accordingly as a Shabbat? What about this? In the end of the Shabbat, as it began to epiphosko, to grow light or dawn. So quite clearly, Matthew declares this night season as a Shabbat. Do we need to observe accordingly or not? The 24-hour Shabbat or not? The Hebrew word Shabbat means set apart rest. I have a question for you. Do you know of a Hebrew word, Shabbat, that does not carry the meaning of set apart rest for the night season? Is there that word? Until someone is able to produce the Hebrew word Shabbat, as written by Matthew, that does not require a period of set apart rest, there is no foundation to consider a 12-hour Shabbat. Matthew declared the night season as integral with the Shabbat. Is it possible that Matthew did not understand the Torah correctly? And I must admit that I got caught into this 12-hour Shabbat trap. And yes, I observed a 12-hour Shabbat for a few months. And I struggled with it greatly because I could spiritualize away most of it. But when it came to this word Shabbat, as recorded in the Torah, I could not find the word Shabbat that registered as a normal day of the week. I could not find that. And I simply could not justify a Shabbat night season where I could do whatever I wanted as an ordinary day of the week. I then had to change my habits. And I agree with the scripture that the Shabbat is a 24-hour period. It starts at dawn and it ends at dawn. 24 hours of rest, exactly as outlined. The base meaning of the Hebrew words, as recorded by the authors of these studies, provides a foundation for structured beliefs. It is these word meanings that allows fulfillment of the statutes of Yahuwah. When these words have been assaulted with convoluted meanings, it is then impostor foundations that are realized. Until the Hebrew language declares a Shabbat as something other than a set-apart rest, there is simply no foundation to start searching for a Shabbat night season that is not set apart, Kodesh, or holy, as we understand in English. There are some things about a Friday crucifixion theory that cannot be justified through the scriptures. The ability to purchase spices on the Shabbat day and observe the Shabbat day properly is only one of the dilemmas. The study, A Sixth Cycle Crucifixion, will deal with this topic quite effectively. But there is another problem, and it is the obvious fact that a crucifixion on the sixth cycle of the week cannot fulfill Daniel's prophecy. Let's read it, Daniel 9:27. And he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. And in the end of the week, I hope you are reading carefully along with me, because that's not what the scripture says. The scripture says, and in the middle of the week, or some editions have in the midst of the week, he shall put an end to slaughtering and meal offering, and on the wing of abominations he shall lay waste, even until the complete end of that which is decreed is poured out on the one who lays waste. Middle of the week, that is when he shall put an end to the slaughtering and the meal offering, or the oblations. When did Yahusha die? Was it not the fourth cycle of the week? Is that not the midst of the week? What about Friday? And I use that word explicitly for a reason. Friday is not the middle of the week. It is a sixth cycle. That is not when Yahusha died. This prophecy cannot be fulfilled by what the teachings that we get, the normal teachings of Friday crucifixion. Why do they do this? Why have we been told that the middle of the week is not about the crucifixion? Because they are insisting on a Friday crucifixion, and therefore this midst of the week cannot apply. Are there any idle words written in the scriptures? If not, maybe we need to consider the phrase in earnest. We have been positively programmed into ignoring this middle of the week passage when it comes to the crucifixion week. Why? Because it cannot be explained or justified in a sixth cycle crucifixion, which is so prevalent in Christianity today. Yet, the sixth cycle or Friday crucifixion is not scriptural. It has no place whatsoever in the scriptures. So let's look more at it. The Pharisees requested 3 full 24-hour periods of Roman guard on the tomb that was holding the body of Yahusha. It is good to note that in a Friday crucifixion scenario, the Roman guard is needed for more than 24 hours. For no more than 24 hours, from the morning of the seventh day Shabbat until the dawn of Sunday morning. There was no need for 3 cycles of Roman guard. On a Friday crucifixion scenario, the Jewish rabble would have been in the court of Pilate when? On the morning of the seventh day Shabbat. Let me read that again. On a Friday crucifixion scenario, the Jewish rabble would have been in the court of Pilate on the morning of the seventh day Shabbat, requesting the 3 days of Roman guard. We know quite emphatically that they would never have done this evil deed on the Shabbat morning. However, now that we are examining the crucifixion event occurring on the 4th cycle or midst of the week, a full 3 cycle request for Roman guards becomes quite interesting. We pick this up on the next slide, the morning after the burial, according to covenant calendar, which is the first Shabbat of unleavened bread and is the 5th cycle of the week. Matthew 27:62. On the next day, which was the 5th cycle, the unleavened bread Shabbat, according to covenant calendar, which was after the preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, saying, Master, we remember while he was still alive that how the deceiver said, after 3 days I am raised. Command then that the tomb be safeguarded until the 3rd day, lest his taught ones come by night and steal him away, and should say to the people, he was raised from the dead, and the last deception shall be worse than the first. Please note the absence of Pilate negotiating for a different structure of a guard program, which had been mentioned by the murderous group. There was a request for Roman guards for 3 cycles of the week, and it was granted. Pilate had no problem with 3 full cycles of Roman guard in the tomb. He agreed. Matthew 27:65. So Pilate said to them, you have a watch. Go, safeguard it as you know how. And they went and safeguarded the tomb, sealing the stone and setting the watch. The Jewish rabble and the Roman guard had these 3 days and 3 nights in mind when they agreed. The Jews knew exactly what time frame Yahusha referenced. And that guard was set from dawn of the unleavened Shabbat until approximately dawn of the 1st cycle. Your Roman guard. The Roman guards intended to fulfill the 3 days and 3 nights timeline, Abib 15 to 17, or 72 hours. Yahusha was placed in the tomb in the fourth watch before dawn. We read about that in Luke 23, 53 to 54. Yahusha met Miriam in the fourth watch, while it was still dark, before dawn. John 20, verse 1. The Roman soldiers were already dispatched or unconscious, enabling Mary to have access to the tomb. From the time that the watch or the Roman guard was up, it was 72 hours from Yahusha's burial at the fourth watch until the Shabbat night at the fourth watch. Once again, 72 hours of Roman guard. The scriptures do make sense if one accepts the words written therein. Returning back to the ladies who purchased spices. Clearly, the ladies were able to purchase spices on the preparation cycle before the seventh-day Shabbat without any problem. But a question has surfaced. Why did the ladies not go and apply these spices by dispensing them around the body of Yahusha on the preparation cycle? Why did they wait until the morning of the first cycle? That answer comes easy. Because the Roman guard held the place secure, and there was not a chance they could get near the stone, let alone enter the tomb. The Roman guard was set for the 3 requested cycles, which would have ended sometime in the morning of the first cycle of the week. The ladies needed to wait until the first cycle morning to have access to the tomb. The ladies had complete freedom to observe the weekly seventh-day Shabbat. Also. Well, we're coming towards the end here. We have a few slides to go. All these have brought us up to the very end of the Shabbat hours, while it was still dark. John 20, verse 1, as the break of dawn was beginning in the first cycle of the week. On the next slide are texts from different editions that reveal very accurate wording which aligns with the Torah. It's all the same scripture, that is Matthew 28:1. Let's look at the wording. Now after the Shabbat, toward dawn on the first day of the week. That is the scriptures. The next one from the KJV. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn, towards the first day of the week. And the next one is from the ISV, and I want you to notice at the end of the word Sabbaths, I have emphasized the yellow S. Why? Because the ISV documents the Sabbaths. There was plural Sabbaths that happened in this week. So it's very interesting. After the Sabbaths, around dawn, on the first day of the week, it still tells us the end of the Sabbath and the first day of the week was about to grow light. Let's look at the ASV. Now late on the Sabbath day, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, it becomes very, very, very clear. We cannot mistake that the end of the Shabbat was about to grow light towards the first day of the week. The Shabbat, my friends, is from dawn to dawn. It does not end at sunset. What again is epiphosko? Matthew 28:1. In the end of the Shabbat, as it begun to dawn, epiphosko, to grow light. It is not to grow darkness at sunset. Epiphosko grows light. That is that first light that you see above the horizon. When you look out there in the early morning and you just see a faint light in the darkness, that's your dawn. That's the start of your Shabbat. Yes, by many, many witnesses, starting right from Genesis 1, we can declare beyond any shadow of doubt that when Matthew declared the Shabbat ended at dawn, he was correct. Dawn to dawn. That's what the scriptures say. In the end of the Shabbat, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, that's what the scriptures tell us. Dawn to dawn. Finding scriptural alignment. Here's our witnesses. Matthew can declare the Shabbat ending at dawn. Mark can record the ladies purchasing spices after the unleavened bread Shabbat, arriving at the tomb at dawn and still observing the Shabbats. Luke can document the burial process extending from evening to the early hours of darkness, just before the light of the Shabbat arrives. John can declare the preparation day of the Passover starting at dawn as Yahusha stands before Pilate. Also, John can declare the preparation day and the Passover of the Yahudim after the sun has set. And at that point, John pinpoints the exact year of the crucifixion. There is no mistake when you understand covenant calendar. John can also hold to the claim of Miriam arriving at the empty tomb while it was still dark on the first cycle of the week, according to Roman reckoning. And Daniel, how about Daniel? He can claim the middle of the week, and this prophecy is highly, highly accurate. And the Roman guards, they can show support to Daniel's prophecy by fulfilling their 3 cycles of security as agreed to by Pilate. And what about our Mashiach, Yahusha? No, he was not confused when referring to the 3 days and 3 nights that Jonah was in the belly of the fish. How many times are we told that the crucifixion happened on Friday and that we were supposed to just figure some strange way to count 3 days and 3 nights for Jonah? Sorry, Yahusha was not confused, but man is. And what about Genesis? Genesis makes perfect sense when it proclaims the light started the first cycle and the night finished off the first cycle as the light of dawn returned to begin the second cycle. That creation week, it is terrific once you understand it correctly according to the Hebrew words and terms and definitions. There is another point that demands clarification before we go. It has to do with the term High Shabbat. What do the scriptures declare as a High Shabbat? How many times do we read about a High Shabbat? The crucifixion was on a 4th cycle, and it was declared a preparation cycle. The following cycle was the first annual Shabbat of the year. It was the first Shabbat of unleavened bread and was on a 5th cycle. The first Shabbat of unleavened bread is the only Shabbat in the scriptures to be declared a High Shabbat. I'll read that again. The first Shabbat of unleavened bread is the only Shabbat in the scriptures declared to be a High Shabbat. What is the one and only time we read about a High Shabbat proclamation? John 19:31. Therefore, since it was the preparation day that the bodies should not remain on the stake on the Shabbat, for that Shabbat was a high one, the Yehudim asked Pilate to have their legs broken that they might be taken away. There is no other verse that claims a High Shabbat, and this Shabbat is very specified as the first Shabbat of unleavened bread. It is the only High Shabbat of the year, one and only. John has just informed us in no uncertain terms that indeed the first unleavened bread Shabbat was the High Shabbat. A preparation cycle comes before any Shabbat on any cycle of the week. This is contrary to the tradition we have been taught. We must prepare to adjust our thinking to be in alignment with the scriptures once again. My friends, Matthew 28:1 is an extremely important and ultra-revealing verse. With the knowledge of Yahuwah's cycles beginning at dawn, we are now able to accept the witness to the burial of Yahusha occurring after the sunset on the preparation cycle and still Abib 14. Also, the precise record of the witness of the ladies who observed the full customary Jewish burial process, then returned home and still had time before the weekly Shabbat to prepare spices and perfumes is like water to a flower. When you go over this study again, these are the verses down there below where you can begin your own examination to study this. And I really, really hope you go over this again so that you understand it fully and completely. Remember, in the time of the gospel account, the words and actions of the ladies were not counted as a reliable witness for anything. However, in this account, the scriptures cement the Wednesday crucifixion, the Shabbat fourth watch meeting of Yahusha with Miriam of Magdala. Note that Yahusha first met with a lady first. Could it be that she could believe easier than a man? Could it be? Would a man have rejected it immediately? What about Miriam? She was more open to meeting with Yahusha. Number 3, the first annual Shabbat of the year on the Feast of Unleavened Bread as the one and only High Shabbat. Number 4, each new day beginning with dawn. And what about number 5? The ladies' purchase, or the ladies' 6th cycle purchase of spices between the first Shabbat of Unleavened Bread and the 7th day Shabbat. This is divine reproof of a sunset commencement day, and it is truly remarkable. What do you think? May Yahuwah bless, guide, and give you wisdom and understanding. And I want to say thank you very much for sitting here and listening to me this whole time. This has been a very long PowerPoint, and thank you for your time. May you be blessed.